I'm going to wish everyone again good evening. I'm Olivia Baldock, I'm a training manager at DIA, and with me this evening, not literally with me, but in Wales, we have the very experienced and knowledgeable Sandra MacDonald-Ames, who is an expert on driver behaviour. She'll go through some of her background, a little bit, a few credentials just in a moment. But we're really honoured to have Sandra, who's with us this evening, and Sandra's also going to be running the DIA driver behaviour courses. More information will be available, dates and times and locations and things at the end of the presentation. So we will, I'll go through some of those and share that with you in case anyone's not seen it. Great value. I'll go through prices and things like that. If anyone's come on some of our national standards training days, then it's going to be a similar type of format, big round cabaret tables and, you know, group work and lots of things. So it's going to be a good day and really fascinating. And also, you know, there is a lot to do with the risk element to what the ADIs are doing as well. And what also constitutes risk with our people that we're training. You know, why do some people behave in a certain way and others behave in a different way? What contributes that? You know, if you broke that down, what would that look like? So I'm going to let Sandra go over that because she's the expert on this subject, not myself. So I'm going to see if I can pass over control. This is where it now starts to get interesting. So I just need to find you my list. There's lots of people on the list, so hold on. Bear with us, everyone. This is something, those of you who've joined us just more recently, something that we haven't done before. Normally I have our guest speakers sat next to me, which is slightly easier, but Sandra is quite a long way away, so let me have a little look. Okay. Oh, I can't find Sandra on my list now. Don't worry.
MRA.
Yeah, that's all right. Don't worry. Worst comes to the worst, then what I will do is oh, sorry everyone, I've just got to go through my list again and find she's disappeared. Okay, bear with me. No, she disappeared. Okay, so what we're going to do, everyone can see my screen. We've established that. There we go. There's Sandra.
You got me?
No, I've got you. There we go. So, okay, we're handing over the reins as I speak, so bear with us. Okay, Sandra, it's all over to you. Just so everyone can see, can everyone see Sandra's screen? Okay, you could use your text boxes and make sure that you can see Sandra's screen. Okay. Okay, we're getting some yeses through.
That's right.
Okay, yeah. Okay, right. Are you okay, Sandra? Are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm fine, yeah.
Fabulous. I'm going to be quiet now and let you carry on.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. It's really nice to have so many people join us tonight. I think we've got up to something like 80 people, which is fantastic, so thank you. You'll have to bear with me because I haven't done one of these before. It's a slightly bizarre situation talking to your laptop and nobody can talk back because I actually can't see the questions or anything that you're typing in, so Olivia's going to kind of deal with that. As she said, she's a little bit far away. In terms of what we're going to sort of talk about tonight, there's a couple of things I just really wanted to clarify, and actually the picture on your screen of the jigsaw, that sort of summarises it really. The mistake I made when I came into this a few years ago is that I thought that driver behaviour, there was kind of one answer to everything, sort of, and you know, you could read something and that gave you the solution. And the biggest thing is that it doesn't. There is no one single answer to this. I mean, if you think about it as having lots of different strands and they all link together in, you know, 1,000,001 ways, it's a bit like our DNA. You know, every single person is unique. So I can't necessarily give answers in terms of this is why people do something, but what I can do, hopefully, is give some ideas as to why they maybe do something. And obviously, you know, there's lots of psychology models out there and all the sorts of things. There is no one right answer, but it's combining all that information together and seeing if you then can come up with something that actually makes sense. Right, so that's really what I wanted to clarify. In terms of psychology, which is really the driver behaviour side, it's just a posh word for psychology. Research is going on since the 30s, and I'm talking 80 years. And obviously, a little bit of research then builds on the last bit, and so it goes on. And hopefully, over time, we'll have a better understanding. And obviously, my plan is to add to that somewhere in the future. So, a little bit about me, so you know what I look like if you don't know already. I'm sure some of you know me already. As Olivia said, I'm based over in Wales. Her geography is slightly out because I'm actually mid-Wales rather than South Wales. I'm on the Herefordshire-Powys border near Hay-on-Wye, sort of Brecon-Hay-on-Wye, if anybody knows it. So if you get to Hereford, hang a right, and you kind of get there. So yeah, sort of a little bit, I suppose a little bit isolated in one sense, but actually it's quite good for me for work because I can kind of go north, south, east, west in lots of different directions, which is really handy. I do have a master's degree in driver behaviour, which I got a couple of years ago over at Cranfield, which some of you may know. As it says, I'm currently studying for a PhD over at Loughborough University. I'm about 18 months in of a 4-year course at the moment. It's a research course. It's at the moment I look at my speciality is driver stress, and I'm looking at that, and I seem to for some reason gone into the emergency services driver stress because I did that with my masters as well, so I'm building on that. So that's where my background sort of is. Olivia sort of used the word a couple of times. She's called me an expert. I find that slightly worrying. I'm not entirely sure I paint myself as an expert.
I think you're a bit more of an expert than me.
Thank you.
The subject.
I don't know. I'm being set up.
I don't have a master's degree. You do.
I feel I'm being set up for a fall, so I don't quite know what anyone's expectations are. So you'll have to bear with us. My work, because I'm only doing my PhD part-time, as like everybody else, I have bills to pay. I am an ADI. I spend a lot of my time doing the police diversionary courses. It's bread and butter for a lot of us these days in terms of speed, the national driver, drink drive, all those types of things. I'll plough through those day in, day out. I do commercial training. As Olivia said, I do D1 and C1 training quite a lot of the time. Currently putting some police drivers through minibus training because despite what they do for a living as armed response, they're too young to drive a minibus, which is quite entertaining. I do CPC. It's not my favourite pastime, I have to say, because for lots of reasons the drivers obviously don't want to be there, as many of you will know. So that's really what I do. Just to give you really a sort of a little bit of background in terms of where I'm coming from. So what I thought I'd do is just start very briefly with a few statistics. We all know the numbers out there, and the thing with statistics is you can twist them around to fit whatever box you like. If someone gives you numbers, you can make the answer fit, and that's very much the same with research as well. If you want it to fit, it will. I want to look a little bit in terms of the driver behaviour. I do want to look very much at young drivers because it is such a big issue. I will actually go into older drivers as well and do a little bit of a comparison, and we'll also look at perhaps why the drivers generally, whatever age, do what they do. Right, so that's really what we want to try and build on today, and it's hopefully going to give you all just a little bit of a starting point in terms of perhaps going and doing further research. It'd be great to see a lot of you on the course that we're going to run, the day course. If anybody then wants to then take that further, what we would like to do eventually is perhaps use that as a sort of stepping stone into then taking that and saying, oh, the next course we run will build on what you did on the first one, and hopefully build up a bigger picture, because in a day, in an evening, you are never ever going to be able to pass on the information. And I'd like to run courses for people in terms of actually what they want to know. And actually, if people say we want to learn more about this, then fine, that's what we want to do. So some of the statistics in terms of the 15 to 19-year-old group, they are twice as likely to die in a road traffic collision. So it says RTA, a little bit dated these days. That's twice as much as the general population, and we know that, that's just common knowledge, but obviously those stats back that up. In terms of the males, Then again, we know, young male drivers are more risky. Again, if you look at that, I mean, that's what, 3 times what the normal population would be. Now, if you sort of break that down, because it looks a little bit kind of, well, how can the males be so high when actually 15 to 19-year-olds is only 82.5 million, and I don't say only likely. There's actually a higher proportion of male, but the female is quite low. It's almost half in terms of percentages. So when you balance the two out, which is how you get to 2.5, we know males are more risky, and what I want to do is perhaps explore why that might be the case, and is there anything as ADIs we can maybe do to help that? Can we understand them better? Is there anything we can do perhaps in terms of questions that we might need to ask? So let's have a look. Driving is made up really of, I suppose, very simplified. There's 2 different elements to it. What we've got is driver's skill. So we're completing a journey from A to B. It's really just the familiarity with road signs, the regulations. It's looking at, to a certain extent, in terms of driving skill, as it says, going from A to B without actually hitting anything. But it's also, in terms of the skills, if we think about the goals for driver education, which I'm sure all of you are very, very familiar with, that's really just sort of the levels 1 and 2. That's just the basics. It's just literally the technical stuff of getting it from one point to another. That's what eventually pays our bills, I suppose. The other part of it in terms of driving is what they look at is, or what they consider is driving style, which is very different to driving skill. Everybody passes a test and gets to a standard, but if you look at perhaps drivers who passed on the same day and you look at them in 10 years' time, they're all going to drive in a different way. They're not going to all be mirrors of one another. Now, typical in terms of research, everything likes to have a little box somewhere. Driving style has been pigeonholed to a certain extent, and there's 4 different types that they're looking at and they'll sort of consider. So we've got someone who drives perhaps in a reckless style. Now that could be someone who is perhaps deliberately breaking the rules. They will drive at perhaps high speeds, they'll do illegal overtaking, they'll not wear seatbelts, they'll use mobile phones, they're aggressive tailgaters. All those types of things would come under that first box of reckless driving. If you've got someone who's perhaps anxious, you're looking at someone who perhaps isn't going to be necessarily relaxed, they're going to be quite stressed when they drive. In terms of their driving style, that might then translate itself into someone who maybe is overcautious. They might take risks because they panic. They might pull out because they don't want to be seen to be sat at the junction too long, even if it's not clear. They feel they've been pushed a little bit just because of the stress. And certainly with stress, and again, this is my background really, you're going to find people become very tunnelled. They certainly won't be listening if people are giving them instructions. They are very, very focused on the task itself. So that's how you sort of summarise the anxious. Angry drivers. Now, goes without saying, doesn't it? It's going to be just people who have perhaps hostility. It's going to be the rage side of things. It's going to be, the advanced hand signals that they haven't published in this edition of the Highway Code. It's going to be swearing, it's flashing lights, all those types of things. Little things will flare people up. And what they found with angry drivers is that someone who is perhaps angry, if you look at the male-female gender split, and I'm not going to be sexist all night, but it is a fact. If you look at female drivers in terms of someone who's angry, they will tend to show their anger and that aggression maybe by shouting through the glass, or they'll wave their hands and those types of things. If you've got the male drivers when they're angry, what they're more likely to do is actually show it in a different way. They will use their vehicle to make it very, very clear they're not happy. They will be the one that's 2 inches from the back of your vehicle. They'll be flashing their lights. They might be the one who actually gets out of the traffic lights and tells you very clearly what they think. And male drivers are more likely to demonstrate it in that way. Finally, we've got patient drivers. So we're talking about someone who will plan ahead. They're patient, they're courteous, they will be very attentive, and they will stick to the rules and drive really in a style, well, we'll get there when we get there. It's that sort of attitude towards it. So that's really how driving as an individual perhaps will be expressed, if you like, on the roads. And what we want to do is certainly tonight, is maybe have a little bit more of an understanding of the person behind that, because your driving style is just then the expression of who you perhaps are. Okay, and driving, if you look, for example, at angry drivers, there has been a lot of research. So do angry people make angry drivers? And the answer fundamentally is yes. If you've got someone who perhaps has, as they're growing up, they are maybe, they're happy to jump out of trees from 30 foot high, or they'll swing into rivers on ropes, or have perhaps addictive personalities, that person might then be shown, for example, when they actually learn to drive and they drive on their own, they'll perhaps be the reckless group as well. So personality very much influences the style that we will then demonstrate when we drive themselves. So that's just really a summary of the driving skill. As we said, it's just the A to B, and it's very much the lower levels 1 and 2 of the GDE. If anybody needs to sort of have a little bit of a brush up, it's not necessarily something we can always remember in terms of all the levels and how it works. If you just put into a search engine about the Hermes project, and you'll get the EU link up, and if anyone wants it, I'm happy to send it over, or I'm sure Olivia can. We can provide that for you, because it is it's quite a weighty document, in all fairness, but it's a very, very good document. And what they have as a supplementary document with that, if you haven't looked at it, is they've actually got a coaching part of that. They said, well, look, this is the main document, this is what the GDE is, and these are some coaching examples as well, and it's actually quite useful if you maybe want a little bit more of a brush up, certainly in terms of coaching. So that's just the skill levels, and obviously we've talked to those. So, driving style, and we've talked about before, driving styles, as we said, reckless, patient, angry, anxious. Driving style, again, by certain researchers, has been, to a certain extent, again, pigeonholed. So we're looking at 3 different elements I think will make up then your driving style. Influenced by socio-demographic factors, and we'll look at those in terms of what impacts, so just personality, and different personality types will influence then the style that we have, but also then the motivational factors. What makes us drive the way we do in terms of getting, for example, from A to B? So as an example, if we are late for an appointment, why do we then perhaps risk driving faster? And a lot of the research shows that, particularly if you've got something that's a very strong motivator for you in terms of your destination or your end goal, you will put that above your actual safety. So safety almost takes a back step to the achievement of that particular driving goal, and that again, I'm going to hark back to the GDE. That's again looking at your trip reasons and those types of things within those high levels of the GDE. But actually, as we said, the safety tends to take a back step. They've also done comparisons with people and going, well, okay, look, you've got a time deadline to get somewhere, but obviously, fuel is expensive, and again, people would rather get to the destination and get there on time than worry about the eco side of things. They again put that as a back step. So let's look at some of these factors and let's see how they all blend together, because as I said, you can have this mix which is very, very different for each person. Some of the factors that would come under social demographics, age is an obvious one, and age and gender really will go together, and we started perhaps to just on the fact that there is very, very much a male-female split, and we all know that, but obviously,
Sandra?
We know using a mobile phone is dangerous, but we need evidence. Yes.
Sorry, Sandra. It's cracking up.
Hello.
Hiya, can you hear me? Yes. Sorry to interrupt your flow there. It's just,
I can hear you fine.
It's breaking up a bit. Have you got anyone in your house which is sort of on your broadband or anything? Anything that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll crack on. So, no, just a few
Right.
comments, and it is sort of, I've lost a few words here and there, but
Sorry.
it's okay. But it's just wondering if anyone had just suddenly fired up their computer or something, and it's eating up your broadband. But
I unfortunately live in an area where our meg speed is 2 megabytes if we're lucky, based on the fact we have a shared line for about 200 houses in the area. So
right, no, you carry on.
that.
Sorry to interrupt. You carry on.
That's fine. My apologies to everybody. So we'll put in a complaint to BT, I think.
Yeah.
So right. Sorry if you've missed anything. We're happy to recap if anyone wants us to. So let's look at some of these demographic factors. Age, as I said, we've started to look at, and we know that young drivers are risky, and we'll certainly explore perhaps the reasons behind that. And age very much linked with gender, so the male-female split. People's education. So something I want to look at in a minute is people, and something I've looked at before is people's use of seatbelts. And actually, does our education level affect the way that we behave and therefore the way that we drive? Because as we said, driving is just an expression of, to a certain extent, personality. Again, we'll consider race, and that's going to come into it. The culture and what is actually perhaps considered socially acceptable or not, as the case may be. And also different countries. Different countries have different cultures. And also, within our own country, there's many, many cultures, certainly in some of the bigger cities and towns. And also people's financial status. And that, in part, links to education. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it does in part. So just perhaps tying in a couple of those factors, and I want to start bringing in some of the risky behaviours in driving that people undertake. In terms of people's use of seatbelts, there is a relationship between somebody's age, certainly their gender, so the male, female, also their race, and perhaps where they stand financially in terms of sort of the economics within maybe the sort of their peer groups. What they found is actually those factors do influence whether people actually wear their seatbelts or not. And what they found is if you have someone who has perhaps a lower financial status, and also people who come from minority backgrounds, they are actually less likely to use seatbelts, and also, and interestingly enough, use child restraints as well, so the child seats. There's a very strong correlation between those. What they've also found, slightly bizarrely, is that if you have someone, again, who perhaps has a lower financial status in terms of their standing within the communities, and also in terms of being non-white, what they found is actually that it can have an effect on mental health, so in terms of people getting depression. What came out of that particular piece of work that was done, it wasn't something I'd done at all, I think this was done in America, but they found that actually people have, particularly if they suffer from depression, they have what's known as a fatalistic view. So actually it's kind of that attitude of what will be, what will be, or if it's my turn to go, it's my turn to go, and that's just the way it is. And people in terms of being at that particular state in their lives are certainly not going to be persuaded by the benefits of wearing a seatbelt, because it's almost divine intervention, I suppose, is the way that they put it. And what they found, and when we said there's a link between certainly adults wearing their seatbelts and the use of children's, there is a lot of evidence, and this applies to any driving misdemeanors, if you like, that the parents' driving habits is very much correlated in terms of then what happens with their children. So, for example, if adults don't wear seatbelts, there is a far lower chance, I think that's good English, I'm not sure what it is, there's a far less chance of their children actually wearing seatbelts. And obviously because they haven't developed then that habit, the children are going to grow up and are less likely to wear seatbelts. And I've spoken to drivers before, and I've seen lots of drivers turn up, even on courses, who don't wear seatbelts. And I think the best excuse I ever had was, well, it will crease my shirt. I'm not sure that's a particularly valid reason for not wearing it, and there's probably lots of other reasons behind why they don't. And I suspect for people like that, it's maybe just a habit. Maybe, well, if my peers aren't doing it, then I'm not going to do it, because obviously there's a big push in terms of younger drivers, particularly in terms of sort of the peer pressure that they'll perhaps suffer. So let's start exploring some of the other factors. So we've sort of, again, as I said, just touched on perhaps why people don't wear seatbelts. As I said, there's a link very much with financial, race, to a certain extent cultural. In terms of countries that are sort of leading, I suppose, lots of the research in that sense, China, and certainly those sort of Far Eastern countries are actually quite strong on that, and they certainly, they have different cultures in terms of their status out there, in terms of particularly the financial links, and they found a lot of evidence that all sort of backs up what has been done in other areas as well. So let's look at kind of the hot topic, I suppose. The kids, the teenagers, this is what obviously a lot of ADIs do on a daily basis, and teenagers, as it says, have the highest crash rate per miles driven. Not really a surprise, because when they pass their test, and I know this from my own kids, and I've had one who passed, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. They drive, the moment they get their keys, they've suddenly lost the use of their legs, haven't they? I mean, my own daughter, she only has to walk, I don't know, 300-400 yards to school. I can see the school gate from my door, but she has to drive there because apparently she needs the practice. I'm not entirely sure how much she's spending on fuel, but they are racking up the miles because it's a novelty. So let's have a look at some of the reasons as to why maybe the teenagers are, as it says, such a high risk, and perhaps just give a little bit of an idea maybe of perhaps why this is happening. So I've put this on here in terms of economics, and this comes back, as we said, the social demographics. This is the financial sort of box that we had on that circle just now. One of the reasons that has been sort of muted out there is yes, kids have a higher risk in terms of the miles they drive, but actually could a contributory factor be the type of vehicle that they're driving in? So for many, many youngsters, based on the cost of insurance, and I know this from my own, having to sort of, the bank of mum, having to fund insurance, etc., is that the vehicles that they can afford, to a certain extent, lack a lot of safety features. Now, that will maybe disappear as an element over time, because a lot of these older vehicles now, they are a lot older, so even perhaps a 10-year-old vehicle now will have ABS and airbags and those types of things. So maybe that factor will diminish to a degree. I don't know, but certainly as it stands, I know a lot of kids who will go, well, I can only afford 200, 300, 400 pound cars. The safety features are on there, or the protection that it's perhaps going to offer them if they do make a mistake, then that is obviously going to be questionable. There is certainly an argument in terms of the newer vehicles. So maybe when they can afford perhaps better vehicles, or maybe they're lucky enough to be insured perhaps on their parents' vehicles, then actually a lot of vehicles now have got a lot of distractions in them. You can, and I was looking at this a couple of days ago, you can get, for example, Ford. They provide a vehicle, I think it's on the Fiesta. You can Bluetooth your phone into it, and obviously we want to discourage our kids from using their phones behind the wheel for obvious reasons. It will transfer the text that they've received into speech on their dashboard, and then what the kids can do is then actually do a speech reply back, and it will then send that as a text. Now, it's legal, and that's fine, and I'm sure that's been checked, but I think that's a very big distraction for the kids, because what we should be discouraging them from doing is using it at all. It should be a way off and out, as we all know. So one of the things that is coming in, and a lot of you will be aware in terms of the trials for the driving test, they are looking at, for example, the use of sat-navs. It is a distraction in the vehicle. People are going to use them, for whatever reason, and actually can they do that safely? But the fact remains that they are distractions, and maybe that's, yes, the vehicles will be safer, but we've got more distractions. And the argument will then be, well, the more distractions we have, the more safety features you have to put in, because the drivers are concentrating less. And obviously that's going to certainly contribute over time in terms of the more factors that we get into vehicles. We have vehicles now that will tell us if we're wandering across a lane, tells you if you don't wear your seatbelt, it allows you to use your phone from the steering wheel, all those types of things, and certainly in terms of how drivers behave when they use that, there's been certainly a lot of evidence in terms of the distractions that are out there, and particularly with the safety, because what they found with commercial drivers, so professional drivers, is in terms of what they did, they used some taxi drivers over in Munich, I think it was, and they had 50 taxi drivers, and they told half of them that they had ABS, or they knew they had ABS, and the other half didn't. And they found that the ones with all the safety features on the vehicles, the ABS, etc., they actually drove faster, they braked later, and they took more risks, i.e. they did a lot of tailgating, and they admitted to doing that because they said, well, the safety is going to bail us out. So there's a good element and a bad element to safety, and it's very important for us, certainly as trainers, to try and get the kids to understand really what those dangers are. And again, that's it's having those conversations that we need to have with them. Do we train with the radio on? Do we train with sat navs in the car? Do we just train with people in the back? Possibly not, but maybe we should, because we need to understand, and they need to understand actually how that's going to affect them, but maybe doing that within a safe environment, in terms of perhaps having us there to sort of pick up the pieces and maybe just intervene where we need to. But certainly that's going to be a factor in terms of how these kids, particularly as we said, these younger drivers, are maybe going to drive. Now, this might surprise some of you. Something else that is a possible explanation in terms of why young drivers, and particularly males, drive the way they do, and I am stereotyping because not all males will do this, but statistics show us that a significant proportion will do, and I obviously do get it wrong. I should entertain some of it this time of night because it's getting late. Something that's sort of in terms of the evolution side of things is that if you go back, to kind of the caveman time, I'm sure pre-Fred Flintstone, men were always perceived to be, and were, the breadwinners. They provided, they were out the hunter-gatherer kind of thing, and that's just the way it was. Now actually there's been a lot of sort of talk, really, I suppose, in the sense that, well, actually, rather than the drivers just doing something because they're suddenly given the car keys and off they go, it's almost an evolutionary thing that is within their DNA, in terms of the fact that the males still need to have that kind of expression of their manhood, if you like, for want of a better description. Now, if you think about in terms of these sort of kids to sort of, I suppose, growing up, historically, and you go across all nature, men tend to, and also the males within those, any species you like, show off because they want to attract the females. Okay, so that's kind of the evolution way. Now, in terms of modern society, driving is a way that they can actually demonstrate this. If you think about, perhaps in terms of the kids then reaching now in modern society, they reach 17, they do think it's a rite of passage in terms of get to 17 and then they can drive. But what that then gives them is independence from the family. They want to demonstrate, if you like, or they want to have acceptance from their peers. They want to develop certainly an identity of their own. Now, by owning a car and driving, that's really them showing that they have got that independence. Not only is it a mode of transport, but it's independence as well. Now, what's not helped with all this in terms of sort of current society, if you like, is particularly the media, because yes, there is an evolutionary side, and that's just a nature thing, and it's this nature-nurture question. If you look then at the media, it really pushes, this stereotype of having fast cars, and, it is, if you like, sold as being very attractive. It's it's cool to have these cars, and this is something you perhaps have to aspire to, whether that's in the movies, whether that's in TV, but they're using cars, if you like, in terms of this high performance side. So they're glamorizing, if you like, the behaviour with the cars, the dangerous driving, the fast driving, that actually this is an okay thing to do. Now, I'm going to make a slight apology now, but just linking on really from the media, and I apologise, ladies, for this one. What, again, this sort of pushes the media side of things. If you think about the link with evolution, when you see posters or adverts for fast cars, and if you just literally put into a search engine, I did this a few days ago, you put in there fast cars, you will get lots and lots of very, very nice fast sports cars, but most of them have got young ladies with very little on draped across the bonnet. You don't tend to see the men draped across the bonnet. So what that sort of does almost is subconsciously say to these young drivers, well, okay, look, if you want to go and get the female of the species, then you need to have this sort of glamorization of the cars. You need to drive fast, you need to show off, and this is what kind of the prize that you almost get for it. And it is that very subconscious message that comes through. So, maybe there is as we say, sort of a cultural sort of element to this. And again, that was one of those socially sort of demographic factors, if you like. One of the main things within that range of factors was age. Now, obviously we've got a nice pretty picture of a brain, and I have to say this is not particularly my area of expertise, as Olivia would say. One thing within that, and something that most of us will know, is that it's the prefrontal cortex. It's not even easy to say this time of night. That is the area within our brain that is part of our identity. It's where your personality comes from. It's responsible for helping us to plan complex decisions. It's used for reasoning. It is the personality expression. And what it will do is it will help moderate our behaviours through perhaps inhibition or not, as the case may be. Now, what they found is that your prefrontal cortex does not actually fully develop until we are around the age of 25. So before that point, it's much harder for people to actually process the risks that are out there. They don't quite understand really the implications of it to the degree that they should have. And we know very clearly that the 17 to 25-year-old age group is the highest risk age group that we have out there, particularly when it comes then to expressing that within driving. With young drivers, because they're not able to really manage those risks, if you give them a complex task within driving, they will find that harder. They will find it harder to judge what those risks are. But actually, if you add into that mix then the influence of things like drugs and alcohol, then they're even less able to be able to deal with it. So what happens then is that when the driving, if you like, moves away from the rehearsed, easy tasks, the familiar things that hopefully are starting to become kind of like muscle memory to them, they are less able to actually make the right decisions. But also they're less able to make the right decision quickly, which obviously for them could be absolutely critical. With that area of your brain, if you like, because it's not fully developed, what they will do is they will underestimate the risks that are out there. They will show perhaps more aggression, and we know that young male drivers are naturally more aggressive. What there also is there's a lack of consideration towards the negative consequences that are out there. And obviously add all those things into that big melting pot, and that certainly will explain in a very big way maybe why these young drivers are more dangerous. And obviously, we showed that from the stats right at the start. So if we look at certainly drivers' overestimation, we talked about drivers underestimating the risks that are out there. What they will do, therefore, is they will overestimate how good they really are. And lots of psychologists out there and researchers have found that actually young drivers do consider them actually more skilled than older, more experienced drivers. They just do think they're better. Now, if you look at any drivers sort of out there, and you ask any drivers, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being rubbish, 10 being brilliant and perfect, and 5 being average. 80% of drivers believe they're above average for skill, and that goes across the board regardless of age. Well, you know, we can't all be above average. It's statistically not possible to do that. So, you know, but to a certain extent, a lot of us do overestimate how good we really are for various reasons. But what, unfortunately, the young drivers will do is they will underestimate their probability of actually being involved in a collision. Now, if you want to sort of put a little title on it, a lot of you will have heard it's known as what's known as optimistic bias. You know, it's never going to be me, it's not going to happen to me, it's always going to be somebody else. And young drivers are certainly more prone to that type of behaviour, if you like. One of the things that a lot of people will ask is, well, why don't we do skid training in this country? Now, there is a very, very good reason why it's not part of our driving or learning process and driving tests within this country, is that many, many years ago in Finland, and you know, we know that's a very cold, snowy country, they changed their driver training program, and it included within that element they had compulsory skid training. Some drivers fell out of that particular program because they'd already started, and they put, some of them were in, and it was about 20,000 sort of within a foot in each camp, so some were doing it and some were not. What they found is that the crash rates actually didn't change, because they were hoping by putting the skid training in that crash rates would come down. Crash rates actually didn't change, but the new drivers that had been put through this training, they had significantly higher confidence levels with their driving than those who hadn't actually done it. Now, what's going to happen with someone who has a higher confidence level is that they will be more likely to put themselves into a situation thinking that they are experienced and skilled enough to be able to bail themselves out of it, where actually what we should be doing, and what they should have done within this program, is actually teach the drivers to avoid the situation in the first place. It's effectively defensive driving. You know, don't put yourself into something you can't get out of in that sense. But these drivers were overestimating themselves very much, and what we should be doing really is actually getting those drivers to understand that how the skills are used, but very importantly for what purpose and under what circumstance. And that particularly back in the 90s when they did this in Finland, that particular program that they put in has played a very, very big part now, certainly in the UK, as to why skid training is not introduced. In terms of the danger, young drivers, because they're underestimating the risk and they're overestimating their skill, they have a poor perception of danger, as it is, if you like. So because the drivers perceive themselves to be skilled and actually able to handle the situation, they are actually then less likely to consider the situation dangerous in the first place, because their target level of risk that they have is going to be misplaced. So although we would look at something and go, no, no way, not doing that, that's very dangerous, they will look at it and go, no, it's fine, it's okay. So if they don't perceive it as dangerous, they won't treat it as such. And this is where this overestimation will come in. And again, young drivers, particularly if we go back to their brain development, that's going to be a major factor with them. So, you know, I don't want to, you know, dig too deep with these young drivers. Obviously, that's not particularly fair. But if we look at the other end of the scale, so older drivers, you know, do we consider them, you know, or do we consider them, or are they actually risky or not? It's a big question, and they are to a certain extent. And if we look at the numbers, because we've looked at the numbers for the young drivers, the very, very risky group within the older drivers is actually the over 75s, and that particular age group accounts for currently 10% of both UK and USA road deaths, which is a very, very big proportion. And yes, that's people who drive, but that could also be pedestrians as well. What happens with older drivers is that what we do know, they will regulate their driving habits. They will know instinctively, or perhaps don't want to admit it to anyone else, but what they will do is they will change their driving habits. They will stick to regular routes. They will drive at perhaps quieter times of the day. they will perhaps drive during the daytime and maybe not actually at night time. What they have though is at that particular age, they have to deal with, obviously because of age, they will have a decline certainly in their processing, their cognitive ability. They are less able to judge speed, certainly. Many people will know that in terms of young drivers, they found that children under sort of, or primary school age and under, they are less able to judge the speed of oncoming traffic. So a car that's doing more than 20 miles an hour for a child that's sort of primary school age, they actually can't work it out. They don't know how fast they're going. And that happens when we're older. You get the same problem. They're not able to judge that speed. Another issue, certainly again in terms of age, is that there is physical factors of mobility. So if they're driving, they're less able to turn around. There'll be far more reliance maybe on their mirrors. There's also an issue in terms of perhaps in terms of the road deaths. If you've got an elderly pedestrian, the first thing is they can't judge the speed of the traffic as well, but also they're going to take longer to cross, and they might then misjudge how long it's going to take to obviously get from one side to another. So that is all going to account within that 10%. But if we look at actually in terms of the older drivers, they are not going to be, by most part, going around and burning up the tarmac, but perhaps we have this perception of the young drivers. What they may do is they will become risky for different reasons. So they might slow down excessively for almost no apparent reason, actually when it's safe to go. They might become risky because if they're going to join traffic maybe from a slip road, you've got someone who maybe is, if you like, considered to be a safe driver. They get up to the speed of and accelerate into the traffic. That to a certain extent is risk-taking, but they're doing it and it's controlled. In terms of then those drivers, and particularly the older drivers, they may actually become unsafe because rather than put in the speed, they will actually then hesitate, and because of that hesitation, they're then going to put themselves again at more risk. So just because of age, and as we said, because of the sort of the cognitive slowing, that's going to put them at risk, but just for a completely different reason in terms of, you know, comparison between the younger and older. Mile for mile, we know in terms of the younger drivers, they are going to be statistically more because they are driving more, but they tend to have this higher speed collisions as opposed to the older drivers, which are much more, they do far less miles, but they'll have far more slower speed collisions. So it's perhaps the car parks, the junctions, those types of things, whereas the younger drivers tend to have the speed and certainly on the faster stretches of road. So they are risky, but for different reasons, as you say, when you compare mile for mile, because of life changes and the way that we compensate ourselves, and we self-regulate when we're older.
Sandra?
Yeah.
Can I've had a question from Jackie. She said,
Yeah.
what do you think about people over 60 learning to drive for the first time?
Oh, no, there's a question.
There's a thinker at 9:30 at night nearly.
Is that how late it is? I don't know what the time is. Right, okay. Right, it's late, sorry. Sorry folks, I didn't realise I talked so much.
No, you
right, right, now in terms of over 60s, I don't have a problem at all. What's certainly happened over time, and I'm sure lots of people will be aware of this, is that if you go back, you know, to going to the cultural thing, if perhaps people who are now in their 60s, they have probably grown up where the husband did a lot of the driving, you know, the women didn't tend to work, those types of things. But obviously society has changed very much. Now people who are in those maybe sort of those pre sort of retirement ages, those types of things, they are having to then learn to drive because maybe the husband's not very well or they've lost him, etc. Life has changed. What in terms of learning, it is simply going to take them longer to learn. I know it's going to take them probably twice as long. They reckon it's something like two lessons for every year of your age or something, you know. So they're going, as long as they can put in the time, then why not? But it can be a long process, and I did teach someone many years ago, and it probably took her on and off about 2 years, and she was mid-60s. They're not going to be risky drivers. in terms of the speed or anything else, but they're perhaps going to be risky because they're more hesitant. But why not? And I think what it's doing is, I personally would like to keep people on the road as long as possible because it gives people mobility and it gives them independence. So yeah.
Great. I hope that's answered it for you.
I hope so. I don't know. I hope so.
It's one answer, isn't it? I mean, there are many ways you can cut that one. So yeah, I mean, Jackie said my thoughts exactly. Up to 2 years learning.
I think as long as you're honest with people and you're realistic, and they are realistic, that it is going to be a long process, then why not? If they're prepared to commit that and they're dedicated enough, then fabulous. Why not?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, so there's a couple more bits I just want to go through, as I appreciate it's obviously getting late. Personality, which is obviously a very big topic. There's really a sort of a long-held suggestion that personality leads to risky driving. It doesn't necessarily predict traffic collisions, but what it does is it influences someone's involvement within it as to their likelihood, if you like, of being involved. And what personality certainly does, if you think about those 3 circles we had, personality very much fuels the motivation behind the tasks or the goals that we've perhaps set ourselves. Now, in terms of personality, some of you may have heard of the big 5 personality traits that came, some researchers came out with them, I think in the 80s, 85, I think it was. They like to pigeonhole everything, but 5 different personality types, and these are widely held, certainly when you start to look at people in terms of they will have higher or lower traits of something. So you've got people who are considered, first of all, to be extroverts. So these are people who will perhaps be assertive, they're adventurous, and what's known as sensation seeking. You've got people who are what would be classed as agreeableness, a bit of a long-winded word, so they're agreeable. So they might be friendly, they might be considerate, they're quite flexible maybe in their approach, and maybe quite modest as well. You've got openness, again, 3rd personality trait, so someone who is perhaps quite sensitive, maybe quite inquisitive, but also could be quite adventurous. Now, that, in a way, if you like, could be considered to be maybe risky in terms of adventurous, depends what level they go to. You've got conscientiousness, so people who are high on conscientiousness might be considered to be careful, they'll be responsible, they're even described as efficient, if you like, so perhaps good timekeepers. And what you've got people who, in terms of neuroticism, is people who, if they're high on neuroticism, they might be quite anxious, they might be tense, nervous, maybe insecure. And we looked at anxious driving earlier on, so we said that perhaps they can get quite nervous and quite stressed, and obviously that has an influence in their driving. If you look at some of these, so someone, for example, who is considered to be high on extroversion but low on openness, and they tend to do this sort of, as we said, high or low thing. Someone who is like that is actually more likely to be someone who will commit sort of break the traffic rules. And particularly people who have been found to have those 2 traits within their personality, they are less likely to wear seatbelts. Now, within that, and I mentioned within extroversion, sensation seeking, so they've got sort of like subsections within this. Someone who is considered to be extroverts, we said, sensation seeking, they are someone who is more likely to have certainly a willingness to take risks, whether it's legal, physical, social, or financial. If we looked at agreeableness, now, you can have someone who's high on agreeableness, again for a long-winded word, or perhaps low. What they would terms of perhaps someone who is low is actually someone who is therefore aggressive, so it would be the opposite. And they'd just describe someone as someone who's an aggressive driver. And certainly someone who is considered to be high on aggression or low on agreeableness is someone who's perhaps got a reduced ability to see or perceive the risks between the road signs, so they effectively become tunnel visioned. Now, within all of these, in terms of personality traits, and those are the circles that we looked at, because as you said, there's very much a crossover. If you have somebody who perhaps is high on sensation seeking, so extrovert, high on aggression, and low on conscientiousness, they're actually more likely to engage in risky driving. So it's taking different personality traits and going, well, okay, let's chuck this into a melting pot. These people with these traits are more likely to do something that's more dangerous. If you had somebody who maybe was high on sensation seeking and also high on aggression, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to double their risks. All it means is that actually they're still as dangerous as someone who maybe is just scoring highly on one of those particular traits. All right, so you don't double the effect, if you like. You're still just going to be as risky. There's just different factors coming into this as opposed to maybe one. So there's just, as we say, just that sort of summary. So more risky personality traits. And I just want to touch on one of the questions somebody asked, and I'm sorry, I don't know who asked the question. Is there a test that is available for us to see who is more likely to be involved in an accident? The answer to that, in terms of us as driver trainers, the answer unfortunately is no. There are statistical tests that you can do. There are recognised psychology things that you can do, but it does need someone who actually can stick it through but sort of very specialised programs, if you like. Really the only thing that we can do as trainers is trying to look for these traits. If you've got someone who maybe has said, in terms of their perhaps risky personalities, try and find out even what they've done at the weekend, particularly young male drivers. If they're going out and they're drinking till 3 in the morning, you maybe suspect that they, I don't know, take drugs or whatever, or they're smoking something funny, or they have been chucking themselves off buildings or something, free running, I don't know. Then that potentially is going to say, well, okay, look, they're a bit of a risk taker, they're a bit more sensation seeking, and all that's going to then do, if they are that within their personality, that will then transpire into their driving, because the driving is just an expression of the personality. That's all it really is. Okay, so it's looking at those different factors. One of the other factors we've looked at, again, just quite briefly, because I'm very aware of now time. If you look at the sort of the male-female split, and again thinking about personality, someone who is found to be higher on the sensation-seeking scale and actually more impulsive, so the kind of the impulsiveness side of things, men are actually found generally to have higher traits of those than women, and we know that males are more risky than women in terms of driving, because we found that the males, in terms of that risky 15 to 19-year-old group, if we go back to start, they are twice as likely to be involved in a road death than the females are. And again, just try and link all the factors together. If we think about the combinations of age, we talk about driving experience, we talk about gender, then you put those all into a melting pot. Males will be prone certainly to more accidents because of the types of characteristics that they hold. We know that they're less able to process the risks, they'll underestimate the dangers, and obviously you add into that the fact that they are going to be higher within sensation seeking, and also they found males have a lower sensitivity to punishment, so they kind of care less about being caught generally. Again, a little bit of a stereotype, but those are sort of, that's what the evidence is showing. That, again, maybe goes in part to explain perhaps why some of these drivers are more risky. So just really in terms of briefly what we can do, they have done sort of comparisons between actually someone who has just received training in terms of skills, but also then doing what's known as insight training. And insight training can be done in groups, it can also be done individually. And to a certain extent, if you look at people maybe who go on speed awareness courses, that is a type of insight training, because it's challenging what they know, and it's getting them to perhaps have the influence from peers as well. And that's why those courses now, in terms of the way they're designed, they're very, very effective in that sense. As trainers, we need to challenge those beliefs. If you think about, in terms of what we believe, we will only change our behaviour when the costs of us doing something, in terms of the risk that we're taking, if those risks exceed the benefits that we feel we're getting, then and only then will we as individuals change. that's the challenge. That's then the challenge actually for us as trainers, is to find that thing within that individual and say, well, okay, look, we've given you this information, you need to make that decision. At what point do you think it's going to tip the balance? And try and think about it almost like a scale. Some of the costs that maybe they might be influenced by, it could be perhaps the fear of harming themselves or somebody else. It could be living with the regret. It could be the emotions perhaps of what would happen if you did maybe kill or injure somebody. It's going to be maybe losing your job. It's going to be the stress that you'll feel. It's the skill for us as trainers is to finding what that is and finding that little crack. And if you can find that, then you can really start to challenge it. But it's about being very effective, certainly with the questions that we use. Use coaching skills. You know, if you tell somebody that it's not a good idea, they're just going to go, yeah, whatever. You need to challenge it. You need to coach, and it needs to be very effective coaching. And really understanding the individual that you're dealing with in terms of perhaps, you know, almost what makes them tick. And that's, you know, maybe where we need to be very, very clever, again, as looking for the clues in terms of perhaps that personality type that they have. As we say, just trying to find, you know, where actually the benefits of changing are going to outweigh the risks of continuing with the behaviour that they're going to do. Because, you know, we have to bear in mind this optimistic bias of, well, it's never going to happen to me. Well, we know it may well just do that. But it's finding something that will maybe change them. Is it because you want to save money? Is it because you need to go and get a better job? Is it because you want to buy a better car? So how are you going to save the money to do that? It can be something quite obscure, but that might be the tipping point that you maybe need as a trainer to be able to find. Right, so I just want to summarise it, and hopefully this doesn't look too complicated. It's really about all these things coming together. So we've looked at perhaps the experiences that maybe we have in our life, and again, that's nature, nurture. We've looked at perhaps the social and the cultural side of things, and perhaps the pressures that we're under, and also personality, the demographics that go into that, so age, culture, gender, education. It's how we perceive those risks, and as we said, you know, particularly thinking about the younger age group. Older drivers will have risky personalities, but they're better able to then rationalise what those risks are. The motivation behind all of this, motivation to change, but also the motivation of perhaps the driving that they are doing and why they're doing it, and that is obviously then transpired, and that will then demonstrate itself very much as the style of driving that they will then show. So again, going back to the reckless, the anxious, those types of drivings that we talked about right at the start. And ultimately, if we can't get those things, we can't break that chain of events, then there is a potential, obviously, then of the collisions at the end of that. So that type of, you know, that's what we want to try and avoid. And it's trying to sort of come in at some point and say, well, okay, this is my understanding, this is what we know you're like, how can we then change this, because nobody wants you to get into that situation. And that, again, it's a very difficult thing to do. But if we're good trainers, then there's no reason why we can't do that. You know, and it's knowing who we're out with. Okay. So, Olivia, I don't know if you've got any questions that have come in.
I'm having a little. I've been answering people actually while you've been talking.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I can read a couple of the questions out, and I mean, one person said, is there any merit in putting together a simple psychometric test that learners could answer before they begin lessons, so instructors have a better insight into their potential personality traits to look out for? We could then increase emphasis in certain areas so they better understand risks. My response to that is that the DIA, as in Carly and me, are sort of looking at this at the moment. You know,
there are
the possibility of it, but what's your opinion, Sandra?
There are tests out there. If you, for example, I know if the young driver training program with Mercedes-Benz, they will put them through a certain psychometric profiling in terms of their personality type. That was developed, and obviously I've got the link with Cranfield. They use a system that's been specifically developed by through Driver Metrics. With that, it's in terms of us being able to access it easily, the problem we have is then interpreting the results, because you have to be trained to obviously to be able to read those results. It's not particularly expensive to put them through. You have to be a little bit careful in terms of personality questionnaires, in terms of them not being certainly academically validated. but it might give you an idea. There are tests out there, and you can read more about personality type. And I don't know much about it, I have to say. There's something called Myers-Briggs, I believe, which I think is personality. There are things out there if you just want an idea of what that person is like, but they wouldn't be validated. There are very, very few out there that are actually validated. So yes, there are bits out there, but you have to be a little bit careful about what you use.
Yeah, good. I mean, just going on to the section when you're talking about older drivers, someone said, I've been having little conversations with people. One of my ex-pupils recently passed. She was 62. She passed in an automatic, and the process only took this lady 6 months. She wanted to do it because her husband had died, and she wanted to keep her independence. Still worked, and the family lived 10 miles away, so loved her lessons, and she had more reasoning in her thinking to hazards and potential hazards. So, my comments were, those sorts of people are a pleasure to teach.
Absolutely.
They make our job worthwhile.
That's why we do. As we said, the kids tend to think, very often it's a rite of passage, so...
well, it's not, is it? I mean, that's absolutely not.
It's a privilege to hold a licence, as we know.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Another comment, good presentation tonight. Any recommendations as to how to improve the situation, particularly with young males? I think this is before you were talking about, your daughter and driving the car when you had the picture of the polo up, and it was around that time on your presentation.
Hopefully I've answered that question to a certain extent. It's about, with the males, they are wired that way, but it's about hopefully challenging that behaviour, and until we get to, and I know one of the questions that came in prior to us starting this tonight, it asked about future developments in vehicle telematics and how they'll affect driver behaviour and risk. And I mentioned about the taxi driver study, for example, and the more kit we load into the vehicles, the worse we get as drivers, because we are turning into a nation of lazy drivers. If the only way that's really going to stop is if we have fully automated driverless cars.
Yeah, one comment was I can see a teacher talking about this in school one day, and the kids saying, really? They used to let people drive cars? And I said, maybe not in our lifetime, well, maybe it will be, I don't know, so let's hope not, because we'll all be down the job centre.
I will be. Specialising in driver behaviour, I'll be stuffed here.
Yeah. I mean, lots of people are saying, about, like Henry, for example, he does over 65's training. He agrees with your comments. Jackie said, my latest elderly driver's memory issues that concern her. They
want very much, people particularly with memory, and I've done, I do quite a few assessments for doctors and the DVSA, like a lot of people, for example, Alzheimer's, which is a memory issue, and then they forget where they're going and those types of issues, is actually what you'll find is that the drivers will very, very much self-regulate. They will stick to the routes. They know there is familiarity. It's only when they're perhaps turned away from that route, perhaps because the road is closed, that the panic then sets in, and they do get confused and they will get lost. But they will, as much as they can, they will self-regulate their own driving, and they will know when to give up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something actually Sue Vernon will probably say as well, because I know she deals a lot with that. So.
She does, and we actually did a webinar with Sue, which is in the members area, everybody, with all of our recorded webinars. Sandra's ones will be in there shortly as well. But Sue and I did one, or say and I, Sue did one especially with older drivers. So if this is something of interest to you, come on Sue's Drivers with Diverse Needs, or go and have a little look at the webinar. It's specific for older drivers, so that type of thing in there would also be good as another point of view. I'm not saying what Sue or Sandra is saying is absolutely gospel. There are different ways and things of looking at a situation. So but these guys are, both Sue and Sandra are both, I use the word expert. I mean, you are in your own field. You're extremely knowledgeable when you've got the accreditations to back it up. So another a comment really. It was all about the peer pressure. It was asked a little while ago, and I didn't want to disrupt your flow too much. This person said, I had a young learner several years ago who passed with an almost perfect test. He was a superb driver. A few months afterwards, I saw him in the local high street and he asked if I would like to see his new car. He took me out for a drive. I was horrified at the massive deterioration in attitude. He couldn't care less about speed limits, gambling with amber red lights, etc. This type of driving has become part of his DNA. It had become natural to drive badly. Why? All his mates drive the same way. As a trainer, I know I gave that young man top quality training and that was reflected in his test pass. What happens after that I have no control over.
No, I think we've all had pupils like that.
I know I have.
I have as well, a long time ago, one of the first pupils I ever taught. I think from my understanding now of the subject, I tend to tackle things and I'm looking for different things. I will look for very subtle clues within someone I'm training that might give me an indication that they are going to drive like that, in terms of comments they will perhaps make, opinions they will have about somebody else, what they've done at the weekend, how their mates are driving. Those now for me give me the clues that actually that person might demonstrate the same behaviour when they pass, because no, you can't do anything once they've got those set of car keys, and absolutely I agree with that, but maybe we can challenge that personality and that attitude behind that, because it may well be an attitude that they've had stuffed into them for 17 years by, for example, parents. You know, as we said, there's a very strong correlation between what the parents do and what they think to then how the children will behave, because that is for the children the norm rather than the exception. So, you know, maybe look at asking those questions and just look for the clues. If they make a comment about another driver, or what do you think, you know, about that, if they give you that clue that actually it's slightly negative, that's the time to start challenging it. You know, but you can't win them all. You don't have the time, because otherwise you'd never leave the side of the road.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. We can sit there for 40 hours and talk it through. Another comment, it's more about standards check actually. I've heard if you come across as to imparting your beliefs onto the pupil as to how other drivers about other drivers behave, this can go against you on the risk assessment section. I'm not convinced this is the case. I've got an idea on that. I mean, have you got any thoughts?
Standards check for you is absolutely your bag, because you know I know very little about the standards. I've played the ostrich up onto this so far. I've stuck my head in the sand and hoped it will go away, and I know it's not going to. You know I have. So,
I mean, my take on this, was, I mean, you know, the DVSA are looking at us now to be client-centred, instead of, whereas the old check test system, we do well if we turned up a bit like a part 3 and said, right, today we're going to do X, Y, Z, and by the end of the session you should be able to do this. Any questions? Are we all on board? And then it was very much more ADI led, let's say, whereas the standards check, it needs to be more the seesaw, like a balance, like a relationship, a professional relationship of equals. And it's my understanding that, I mean, if you come across and you're too opinionated about something, then you've got to think, well, what benefit is that to that learner? If it's just something about commenting on somebody's driving, but it was a comment, was it a useful comment? Was it just a bit of a nasty comment? Was it beneficial in any way? And it's also about getting the pupil to think it through. We need to be developing thinking drivers and not sticking it on a plate, warming it up and sticking it under their nose. And I'm not suggesting anyone on this webinar is doing this. However, it's all about getting people to get them to become active problem solvers rather than a passive receiver of knowledge. And that's my take on that. I don't know what your idea is on that, Sandra, if you've got any questions or comments on that.
No, and I've said this right at the start. This is, research building on research. We do not have one answer to everything. And I agree with what you said in the fact that you should never tell somebody this is the way it is, because if you tell them, they'll just go, yeah, no, thanks. you know, it doesn't interest them. You know, they've got to buy into that belief.
Yeah, and I mean,
I agree with what you said.
I will put a health warning on the statement I've just said and what you've just said there as well. But it depends who you're dealing with, and it's know your customer, your client, your pupil, your student, whatever you want to call them. It's get to know them, and this is another. And what Sandra's been speaking about tonight is another aspect of that. So in order to be client-centred and cater for their needs and their learning style, etc., and all of this stuff, you need to understand how they take on board information, how they process the information, what works for them, what's worked for them in the past, how they achieve something, what's an effective way of them learning, because that's the key. If we understand that, then we can cater and tailor their learning experience for that, and that's being client-centred. So it might be that you're dealing with a person who does like to be told. They like to be given the information, and that's how they like to learn. And if that's how they like to learn, you come on board with coaching approaches in the main. They may not buy into that. They might just like to be, look, can you just tell me or show me, you know, what it is. They need to know what it looks like. So it's a bit like if anyone here's cooked out of a recipe but without the picture. You know, how do you know when you've got there? Because you have no idea. You know, is this cake supposed to look like that? Or I don't know. You know, it's that type of thing. To my mind. So, okay. Have a little look. Yeah. Again, someone's put understanding principles is good. Pigeonholing is another. I think there is a real risk there. What's your comments to that one?
Mine. I'm not. I mean, I don't know whether that's sort of a. And you know, apologies, this is wrong. I don't think, I'm not, certainly from my point of view, I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody, but that is the evidence that actually we have certain personality traits, but every single person, as I said right at the start, is unique. But it's understanding what that personality type is then how you can then use that to an advantage. Because whether we like it or not, we have certain personality traits, and that's not necessarily pigeonholing. That's just our genetic makeup.
Mm.
And it's the, you know, it's the proportions that we have of each personality, of each trait that we have, you know, and everyone's going to have a slightly different proportion of each one, you know, so, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so just one or two more questions, and then I will need to start wrapping this thing up because I'm aware of the time. It's, you know, it's late o'clock officially. Just one more quick question, perhaps. Sandra, what do you think about young driver programs like pre-17?
I'm going to be very careful about what I say. My opinion is, having dealt with them many years ago, that the kids, and I have to say, I have done them for. I worked on one last summer just in terms of a scout event. You know, it was a chance for a load of 11-year-olds to drive around a showground for 10 minutes as an activity, and they absolutely loved it. But it was a case of them getting from A to B. I have an issue with certainly some of the mainstream ones that are sold out there, if you like, and they're not necessarily all they're cracked up to be, in the sense that they are not really challenging the kids on the risk. The kids do not have time. They will have 28 minutes perhaps behind the wheel of a car going from A to B, and the parents want to see them moving from A to B, and you don't really have the chance to challenge about the fact that drink driving is bad or using your mobile phone is bad and those types of things. It depends on how it's delivered, but it's the same old adage, you get what you paid for. You go to the top end, you will absolutely get your money's worth. You know, so it depends what you're doing with it. You know, if you've got the time to challenge the behaviours on there and get these kids to understand the risks early on, fine, but a lot of those programs don't. So you have to be very careful, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. I've got a question on here. Will we miss Clarkson?
Personally, no.
All right. Okay. I'm going to reserve judgment on that one. Bring me at the DIA and I'll give you my opinion on the one-to-one. I'm not saying good or bad.
He's great for entertainment. He is hilarious.
Oh, he's fantastic.
He is hilarious, but what he does for road safety is absolutely zero. So, yeah.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I am going to attempt now to get control back. So,
I was going to say I can forward the screen if you want me to.
yeah, well, can do. Let's have a little look. I'm gonna come back to me now. So,
Okay.
can everyone see what I'm seeing? That's what I want to know. Can you just let me know? You should be able to see the thank you for attending. So if everyone can just I'm just asking, so I'm just double checking. I've got a couple of yeses. Thank you guys. Lovely. Right. Just to wrap this up now. We'd like to thank Sandra so for such a doing a graveyard shift with me. Thank you very much.
No problem. Sorry it was so late.
Your time now, I think people are liking it. They like the graveyard shift. This is good. So
I've been up at 4. I'm not sure I do.
so what I'd like you to do now, everyone, is if you like this, this was just tip of the iceberg, literally. If you like this, then come on one of Sandra's training days with us at DIA. Share some of her wealth of knowledge. You will not regret it. And if you like this, as I say, it's going to go down into even more depth. So these are the dates and times and locations where Sandra is going to be. So these are all on our website, which is at the top, driving.org/training, where you can download the agenda for the day as well. So you can have a little look into it. If you've got any questions or queries, you can ring me at DIA. Phone number is 0208 686 8010. I'm not there right now, but I'm there from 9 in the morning, so you can give me a call. We are shut over Easter weekend, so we're back next Tuesday. I'm not in next week. I managed to escape for a few days. You know, but you can always email me because I'm one of those sad people. I log into my emails when I'm not at work. So just so you're aware that this is coming up, and also other courses that you might be interested in. We got our Drivers with Diverse Needs Training Day. I've not put all the dates on there, but they're from our on our website again, driving.org/training. Parent Power Roadshows, they're free, don't cost you a penny. And our DIA Spring Professional Development Day Leicester race course, which is all about driving through the ages. So you're there on. You there for that, Sandra?
Not at the moment. I'm trying to move some stuff around. So if I can, I will certainly go, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's shaping up to be a great day. It's going to look at the young driver as well. Everyone does, obviously, but it's going to be looking at the Middle Ages, which we've called the Middle Ages, which are, you know, from an occupational road risk point of view to a medical point of view. So if you've had an accident, injury, illness, Sue Vernon's going to be a speaker there. We've got Lisa Dawn from Cranfield, Dr. Lisa Dawn from Cranfield University. We've got people from TRL. We've got goodness knows what. We've got all these expert speakers in. And we're also looking at the more mature driver as well. And any particular aspects of that demographic we need to be paying attention to as driver trainers. So that's all coming for you at Leicester Racecourse on the 27th of April. So we do have some tickets available. So you know, do come on there. It would be great to see you all. Next driver behaviour webinar is same time, same place next Wednesday, 8th of April, 8:30, all the 8s. And this time Sandra is going to be looking at memory, you know, so you know, come along and join in. I've got a few people on there saying, yeah, great, I'm booked on that, so all good. So go on to, if you want to register for the for any of Sandra's training courses or any of the other training courses or Sandra's next webinar, go to our website driving.org/training. Have a look about. There could be something interesting on there for you. Thank you very much, everyone. If you'd like to say your good nights now, Sandra.
I will. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time. I'm sorry it is so late because I know it's 10 o'clock. If there is any feedback, I certainly would be very interested, good or bad. I've got thick skin, I don't mind, because what we want to do is develop something that's actually useful for you as well, so just let us know. Thank
Anything
you.
bad, we normally just screw it up and put it through the shredder. No one knows.
I won't.
Our feedback's great, you know. I'm teasing everyone. We do surveys. Everyone should have had a survey about webinars recently, so that's fascinating reading. And I've responded to that and what you have requested, plus some more. So those new webinar dates will be up within the next few days on the website. So hopefully you'll all come and tune in for another exciting episode. So everyone, thank you ever so much, and we will bid you a good night, and thank you for attending. Bye everyone.